German shepherd lay motionless inside a torn cardboard box, half buried in snow at the edge of a silent mountain road. Ice clung to its fur, its body stiff, breath so faint it could barely be seen in the cold air. A Navy SEAL, just home from duty, stood frozen beside his truck, the engine still running, his boots sinking into fresh snow as he realized the truth. Someone had left this dog here to die. He had seconds to choose. Drive on and let winter finish the job, or stop and carry a life that no one else wanted. He had survived combat, loss, and long nights where mercy was a liability. But this was different. This was not a battlefield. This was a test of the heart. As he knelt in the snow and lifted the frozen body into his arms, he didn't know if the dog would survive the night. But he knew one thing for certain. If he turned away now, he would lose something in himself that could never be recovered. If this moment speaks to you, type Amen, stay with us, and witness how one quiet act of compassion becomes a miracle that changes everything. Winter had settled over the Wyoming high plateau with a quiet, unforgiving certainty, snow drifting sideways beneath a darkening sky as daylight surrendered early to cold. Rowan Hale drove with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the narrow stretch of road ahead, where snow blurred the edges of asphalt and pine shadows melted into dusk. He was 29, lean and compact in build, his body shaped by years of discipline rather than comfort. His hair was cropped short, regulation even now out of habit, dark against skin weathered more than his age suggested. His face was clean-shaven, jaw angular and set, with the kind of stillness that came from learning long ago how to keep emotions contained. Rowan had finished a rotation only 48 hours earlier, long weeks overseas, where time moved by orders and threats rather than calendars. And now he was finally driving back toward a temporary rental cabin near the foothills, a place meant for rest rather than belonging. The truck hummed beneath him, tires crunching softly over fresh snow. The radio remained off. Rowan preferred the silence. Noise had a way of pulling memories forward when he wasn't ready to deal with them. Since joining the Navy SEALs at 22, silence had become his way of thinking, space where fear, loss, and doubt were packed away and labeled as things to be handled later. But later had a habit of stretching indefinitely. The weather report had warned of worsening conditions after sunset, and Rowan knew he should have pushed harder to reach town before nightfall. Still, something in him resisted haste. Coming back always felt strange, like re-entering a life paused mid-sentence. He wasn't returning to family or familiarity, just to a quiet structure with running water and heat, somewhere to sleep before orders arrived again. Wyoming suited him for that reason. Wide, sparse, uninterested in who you were or where you'd been. The road curved sharply around a stand of pines, the headlights slicing through snow thick enough to dull depth and distance. Rowan eased off the gas instinctively. That was when he saw it. Something pale and rectangular half buried near the shoulder, barely distinguishable from the surrounding drifts. He slowed further, frowning, scanning for debris or a fallen sign. As the truck crept closer, the shape resolved into a battered cardboard box. Its edges collapsed inward, one side torn open and darkened by moisture. Rowan's foot hovered over the brake. He told himself it was probably trash, someone careless, someone lazy. Rural roads collected those things in winter. He could drive on, reach shelter before the storm worsened. But experience had trained him to trust hesitation as much as certainty. He pulled over, hazard lights blinking weakly through falling snow, and cut the engine. The cold hit immediately when he stepped out, sharp enough to burn lungs and skin alike. Wind drove snow against his jacket as he approached the box, boots sinking into drifts that reached mid-calf. Up close, the cardboard was soaked and brittle, its top caved in. A length of frayed rope lay beside it, stiff with ice. Rowan knelt slowly, breath fogging thick in front of him, and peeled back the torn flap. For a moment, his mind refused to translate what his eyes were seeing. Inside the box lay a German shepherd, fully grown, its body curled unnaturally tight, fur matted and rigid with frost. The coat, once black and tan, was dulled by ice and road grime, individual hairs frozen together in sharp clumps. The dog's ears lay flattened against its head, tips crusted white. Its chest barely moved. Rowan had to lean closer to confirm there was any breath at all. His training reacted first: pulse, temperature, exposure time. But something else followed immediately after, a sudden, visceral tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with protocol. The dog was heavy, far heavier than a puppy, and that made the situation worse. A grown animal didn't end up like this by accident. Rowan noticed the collar next, or rather the lack of it. A strip of leather still circled the dog's neck, cut cleanly through, edges stiff and sharp with ice. There were no tire marks nearby, no signs of a struggle. Just the box, placed deliberately at the edge of the road, angled toward traffic, as if meant to be found, or ignored. Someone had chosen this. The dog's eyes were half-lidded, dark and glassy, unfocused but not empty. When Rowan's gloved hand brushed its side, the animal flinched weakly, a low sound vibrating through its chest, more reflex than warning. Its body was cold, dangerously so. Rowan knew enough about hypothermia to recognize how little time remained. Another hour, maybe less, once the temperature dropped further. He straightened slowly, snow swirling around him, the wind pressing against his back as if urging him onward. He could call animal control, he told himself. He could flag down another vehicle, wait. But there were no headlights behind him, and cell service here was unreliable at best. Waiting would cost time the dog did not have. Rowan exhaled, long and controlled, the way he did before breaching a door or making a decision that couldn't be undone. This was different from the world he knew. No orders, no chain of command, just choice. He reached into the box again, sliding his arms carefully beneath the dog's rigid frame. The weight surprised him, solid muscle beneath frozen fur, and as he lifted, the animal let out a faint, broken sound, somewhere between a breath and a whine. Rowan adjusted his grip immediately, pressing the dog closer to his chest, letting body heat transfer through layers of fabric. Snow dusted the dog's back as he turned toward the truck, every step deliberate, careful not to jostle a body already struggling to hold on. By the time he settled the dog into the back seat, wrapping it in his spare jacket and blasting the heater, Rowan's hands were shaking. Not from cold, he'd endured far worse, but from the delayed impact of understanding how close he'd come to driving past. He climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, forehead resting against the steering wheel, breath slowing. The dog lay still behind him, chest rising shallowly, fogging the air with each fragile breath. Rowan checked the mirrors, half expecting headlights, some sign of explanation, but the road remained empty. Just snow and dark, and the quiet aftermath of someone else's decision. He put the truck back into gear and pulled onto the road, tires slipping briefly before catching. The storm thickened as he drove, night closing in fully now, but Rowan felt a strange clarity settle over him. Whatever came next, calls, questions, responsibility, would wait. For now, there was only the steady hum of heat filling the cab and the knowledge that turning away was no longer an option. Behind him, the German shepherd shifted faintly, breath shuddering, still alive. And Rowan Hale drove on through the snow, carrying the weight of a life that should never have been left there. Rowan Hale reached the rented cabin just after full dark, the headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the snow as wind pressed hard against the truck's sides. The structure sat alone at the tree line, a low, practical build of untreated wood, pitched roof heavy with fresh accumulation. No decorative touches beyond a single porch light that flickered as if undecided about its duty. Rowan killed the engine and sat still for a beat, listening. The storm swallowed sound the way water swallowed stone. He stepped out, opened the rear door and lifted the German shepherd with care. the animal's weight sagging against his arms in a way that made his jaw tighten. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold timber and dust. Rowan set the dog on a cleared patch of floor near the wood stove, then moved with the economy of habit. Boots off, stove opened, kindling arranged, flame coaxed to life. He kept his breathing steady, because steadiness mattered. Panic had no place here. The dog's ribs were visible beneath frozen fur, chest movement shallow and uneven. Rowan peeled off the spare jacket, then another layer, wrapping the animal without rubbing, without rushing. Shock was as dangerous as cold. He remembered the rules the way he remembered maps. Rewarm gradually, protect the core, monitor breathing, do not force intake. He filled a kettle, set it on the stove, and tested the heat with a fingertip until it was barely warm. Then soaked cloths and laid them along the dog's abdomen and neck, replacing them as they cooled. The animal made a faint sound, more vibration than voice, and Rowan leaned closer, eyes narrowed, listening with his whole body. "Stay," he murmured, not because the dog could understand the word, but because he needed to hear himself say it. Time thickened. The storm clawed at the walls. Rowan worked in deliberate loops, checking gums for color, adjusting blankets, counting breaths. The dog's eyes opened briefly, dark, unfocused, clouded by fatigue, and closed again. When Rowan slid his fingers beneath the dog's jaw, he felt the tremor of a pulse, weak but present. Relief did not come as a wave, it came as a small easing, a notch loosening in a clenched place inside his chest. He kept going. He warmed water again, dipped a finger, touched it to the dog's tongue. Nothing. He waited. 10 minutes. Tried again. This time the tongue moved, barely, but enough. Rowan nodded once, as if acknowledging a contract. He spoke again, low and even, words chosen for their cadence rather than meaning. "Easy. You're not alone." He did not think about how many times he had said something like that to men who had not made it. He focused on the present task, the immediate life. When the dog's shivering began, a controlled, involuntary response Rowan had been waiting for, he allowed himself a breath. Shivering meant the body was fighting. He adjusted the blankets, positioned the animal on its side to keep airways clear, and sat back on his heels for a moment, hands resting on his thighs, shoulders hunched, not from fear but from attention. He noticed details then. The cut leather collar stiff at the throat, the scar along the dog's left flank, old, healed poorly, suggesting a past that had not been gentle. He did not catalog cruelty. He did not need to. He returned to work. The name came without ceremony. Rowan did not search for it or test it aloud. It surfaced the way some decisions did, quiet, unarguable. "Cur," he said once under his breath. The sound felt right in his mouth, short, firm, something you could call into wind and be heard. He pressed a palm to the dog's shoulder, grounding the word in touch. Kerr's breathing steadied by a fraction, enough to keep Rowan awake with attention rather than fear. He pulled a chair close, positioned himself so he could watch the rise and fall without moving, and settled into a vigil that felt unfamiliar in its softness. In the field, he watched for threats. Here, he watched for life. Hours passed. The fire burned down and was built back up. The kettle steamed and cooled and steamed again. Snow stacked against the windows, turning the outside into a white blur. Rowan's body registered fatigue but did not claim it. He had learned long ago how to function past the point of comfort, how to keep hands precise when the mind wanted to drift. But this was different. There was no adrenaline to carry him, just choice, renewed each minute. He found himself thinking about the box by the road, about the angle at which it had been placed, about the clean cut of the collar. He pushed those thoughts away. Investigation belonged to daylight. Survival belonged to now. Kerr stirred again near midnight, a low sound vibrating through his chest. Rowan leaned in, listening, watching the gums color toward pink, watching the eyelids flutter. He warmed a small bowl of water and touched it again to the dog's tongue. This time the tongue pressed back, a reflex, but a willing one. Rowan allowed a single drop to slide in, then another, pausing between each. He did not hurry. He wiped the muzzle clean, adjusted the blanket, and waited. When the dog swallowed, Rowan closed his eyes for half a second and let the relief register. He did not smile. He nodded, once, to himself. Sometime after that, he could not have said when, there was a sound at the door. Not a knock exactly, more a hesitant scrape followed by a pause, then a firmer rap. Rowan's shoulders tightened automatically, old instincts flaring. He stood, moved to the door without noise, and listened. The storm masked footsteps, but the presence remained. He opened the door a hand's width. Cold rushed in, sharp and alive, carrying with it a man's silhouette in the porch light. The neighbor was older, lean to the point of gauntness, posture straight in a way that spoke of stubborn endurance rather than ease. He wore a heavy coat cinched at the waist, gloves worn smooth at the fingertips. A gray beard framed a narrow mouth, trimmed short, and his eyes, pale, watchful, missed very little. "Name's Amos Calder," he said, voice dry, carrying the rasp of someone who did not waste words. "Saw your lights. Storm like this, figured I'd check." He glanced past Rowan, eyes landing immediately on the shape by the stove. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or old knowledge. Rowan stepped aside and let him in. Amos moved with careful economy, boots placed where they would not track slush, coat shrugged off and hung without comment. He crouched near Kerr, hands stopping short of touch, as if measuring the space between curiosity and respect. "German Shepherd," he said, not a question. "Adult, male." He looked up at Rowan then, studying him in the same way he had studied the dog. "You did right," he added after a moment. "Slow warming. People get that wrong." Rowan nodded. He did not explain. Amos straightened, joints cracking softly, and leaned back against the table. "Found like that?" Rowan told him about the box, the collar. He kept the description factual, spare. Amos listened without interrupting, jaw set. "Not a stray," he said finally. "Not out here. Someone wanted him gone." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Amos left after that, as simply as he had arrived. He paused at the door. "Storm will break near dawn," he said. "If you need supplies, I've got a generator and a radio that still picks up county. I'll check back." Then he was gone, swallowed by snow. Rowan closed the door, locked it, and leaned his forehead briefly against the wood. He exhaled, long and controlled, and returned to his post. The rest of the night passed in measured increments. Kerr's shivering eased. His breathing evened. The fire burned steady. Rowan fed water in careful drops until the dog refused, tongue retreating, jaw slack with exhaustion rather than distress. Rowan took that as permission to let him rest. He sat back in the chair, eyes never fully leaving the rise and fall at the dog's side. When his own eyelids drooped, he stood, stretched, added wood, checked again. Vigil was not passive. It was active patience. Near dawn, the storm loosened its grip. The wind softened. The snow fell straight instead of sideways. Pale light filtered through the windows, turning the cabin gray and quiet. Kerr shifted, lifted his head a fraction, and met Rowan's gaze. The look was not trusting yet. It was wary, assessing, but it was present. Rowan held the gaze without leaning in, without reaching. "You made it," he said, not triumphant, just factual. He set his hand palm down on the floor near the dog's muzzle and waited. After a moment, Kerr's nose touched his knuckles, brief and cautious. Rowan did not move. He breathed. Daylight revealed more. The scar on the flank, the calloused pads, the thinness beneath the fur. It also revealed something else, something harder to name, a steadiness returning. Rowan fed a little more water. He warmed broth and let the steam fill the room, then set it aside. Not yet. He knew better than to rush the next step. He checked the door, the windows, the road beyond the trees. No tracks approached, no engines, just quiet. When Amos returned mid-morning with a thermos and a folded blanket, Rowan accepted both with a nod. They stood together for a moment watching Kerr sleep. "Name?" Amos asked. "Kerr," Rowan said. Amos nodded, approving or neutral, it was hard to tell. He set the thermos down. "You're in it now," he said, not unkindly. Rowan did not argue. He did not look away. By noon, Kerr's breathing had settled into a rhythm that did not demand counting. Rowan allowed himself to sit on the floor, back against the wall, and feel the weight of the night settle into his bones. He did not feel fear. He felt responsibility, clear and immediate. He also felt something else, quieter. The knowledge that watching over a life without a weapon in hand required a different kind of strength. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, the work was not done. Rowan leaned forward, adjusted the blanket one last time, and set his watch alarm for the next check. He would not leave the cabin today. He would not look past this moment. He stayed, and the staying mattered. Morning arrived without ceremony. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a dull gray light that pressed low over the valley, flattening color and sound alike. Rowan Hale stood at the cabin window with a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hands, watching mist rise faintly from the tree line. His posture was straight, shoulders squared out of habit, but there was a tension in the way he leaned his weight slightly toward the room behind him, where Kerr lay resting near the stove. Even now, when the immediate danger had passed, Rowan found it difficult to look away for long. Vigil, once learned, was not easily unlearned. A crunch of boots on packed snow broke the quiet. Rowan turned before the knock came. He recognized the gait immediately. Measured, deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. Amos Calder appeared in the narrow window beside the door, his outline lean and upright against the pale morning. Rowan opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Amos entered slowly, brushing snow from his coat with gloved hands worn smooth by years of use. Up close, he looked every bit his age, early 70s, perhaps older, his frame narrow but unbent, spine straight as if pride alone kept him upright. His beard was iron gray, trimmed close to a face deeply lined by wind and sun. His eyes were a pale, sharp blue, the kind that had learned long ago how to read distance and movement, and they took in the room in a single, practiced sweep. When his gaze settled on Kerr, something in him stilled. He did not approach at first. He stood where he was, hands resting loosely at his sides, breathing quietly, as though waiting for permission from the silence itself. Kerr lay on his side atop layered blankets, chest rising and falling with a steadier rhythm now. His dark coat dulled but no longer rhymed with ice. The dog's eyes opened briefly at Amos's presence, alert but not alarmed, then drifted shut again. Amos exhaled through his nose, a sound barely audible. "He's been around people," he said at last. His voice was low, dry, unembellished, not a question. Rowan nodded. "He listens, watches first." He paused. "Didn't fight the help." Amos stepped closer then, crouching with a stiffness in his joints that he did not bother to hide. He leaned on the balls of his feet, balanced and careful, stopping just short of touching Kerr. His eyes traced the line of the dog's body, lingering on the scar along the flank, the worn pads of the paws, the cut collar still lying on the table nearby. When he spoke again, his voice carried no anger, only certainty. This dog had a job once, guarding most likely. Someone trained him enough to obey, not enough to care. Rowan watched Amos closely. The old man's expression did not shift, but something hardened behind his eyes, a tightening that suggested memory rather than judgment. Rowan had seen that look before, in men who had survived long enough to regret certain skills. "Konchonai tungkochu," Amos said quietly, slipping into the cadence of a man speaking truth rather than accusation. Then he translated himself without prompting. And not a good one. Rowan said nothing. He waited. Amos straightened with a soft grunt and moved toward the window, resting one hand on the sill. Outside, the road cut a pale line through the snow, empty now, innocent in the daylight. "Couple months back," Amos continued, eyes fixed on the distance, "a truck started coming through here regular. Black, heavy duty, didn't belong to anyone local. Driver kept to himself, didn't stop in town, built something temporary up near the old logging spur." "What kind of something?" Rowan asked. Amos shrugged. "Fence first, then lights, generator noise at night. I mind my own business, but I notice patterns. Man had a dog, big shepherd, looked like this one." He glanced back at Kerr, "Used him to scare off anyone curious enough to wander close." Winter came. Snow got heavy. Generator noise stopped. Fence came down. Man left. "And the dog," Rowan said. Amos nodded once. "Didn't leave with him." The words settled into the room like cold air seeping under a door. Rowan felt a familiar tightening in his chest, not the hot anger of confrontation, but the colder kind, the kind that sharpened focus and stripped away excuses. He had seen this before too, though usually it wore a different uniform. Abandonment disguised as necessity. Cruelty framed as inconvenience. Amos turned fully now, his pale eyes meeting Rowan's. "I hunted these woods for 40 years, he said. "Trapped some, tracked others. I quit because I learned something late. Animals don't betray you unless they're taught to." He paused, then added, "People do." Kerr shifted, letting out a soft sound. Rowan knelt immediately, adjusting the blanket with care. The dog's eyes opened again, clearer this time, tracking Rowan's movement. His ears twitched at Amos's voice, but did not flatten. Trust, Rowan realized, was beginning, not fully formed, but no longer absent. "You didn't report the man?" Rowan asked, keeping his voice neutral. Amos shook his head. "Report what? Suspicion? Counties stretch thin. Winter takes priority. Roads, power lines." He looked away. "By the time someone listens, the damage is already done." There was no bitterness in his tone, only resignation shaped by years of watching systems fail quietly. Rowan understood that kind of silence too, the silence of knowing when effort would not equal outcome. They spent the next hour in sparse conversation, the kind built from statements rather than questions. Amos brought over a small sack of supplies, dry kibble from a sealed container, a metal bowl, antiseptic spray. "For when he's ready," he said simply. Rowan accepted them with a nod. No thanks. Gratitude was assumed, not spoken. As the light strengthened, Amos moved toward the door. He paused there, one hand on the frame, posture rigid as if bracing against something unseen. "You're not from around here," he said. "No," Rowan replied. Amos studied him, eyes flicking briefly to the military truck visible through the window, then back to Rowan's face. "But you're the kind that stays when it matters." Rowan did not answer. Amos did not wait for one. After the door closed, the cabin felt quieter, but not empty. Rowan returned to Kerr, sitting on the floor beside him, back against the wall. He watched the dog breathe, watched the subtle tension in the muscles ease as warmth held. In the silence, Amos's words replayed, not as accusation, but as confirmation. This had not been an accident. Kerr's suffering was not the result of weather alone, but of choice. Rowan looked down at his hands, scarred and steady, tools that had once existed only for offense and defense. He flexed his fingers slowly. He thought of the box by the road, the careful placement, the cut collar. He thought of the fence, the lights, the generator Amos had described. A temporary life, built for utility, discarded when inconvenient. The unspoken truth settled between him and the sleeping dog. Survival was only the first step. What followed required something different. Kerr opened his eyes again, and this time held Rowan's gaze. There was wariness there, yes, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps, or instinct. Rowan lowered his voice, not to command, but to reassure. "You're safe here," he said. He did not add for now. He did not promise more than he could control. But the words mattered, because they marked a line he would not cross backward. Outside, the valley lay still beneath the pale sky. Tracks from the storm remained unbroken. Whatever had happened before had left no witnesses willing to speak. But truth did not always need noise. Sometimes it lived in what was left behind, in scars, in silence, in a dog that did not run when offered help. Rowan remained seated there long after Kerr drifted back into sleep, the coffee forgotten, the day waiting. He understood now that saving a life did not end with pulling it from the cold. Sometimes it meant carrying the weight of what that life revealed. And that weight, once accepted, could not be set down. Rowan Hale woke before dawn to a silence that felt earned rather than imposed. The storm had moved on during the night, leaving the world clean and watchful. The snow settled into smooth plains that reflected the faint blue of early morning. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low but steady, its embers holding warmth the way discipline held a line. Rowan sat up from the chair where he had slept in fragments and listened, not for danger, but for the small, familiar sounds that had become his measure of the night's success. Kerr breathed near the stove, slow and even, a rhythm that no longer demanded counting. Rowan stood, joints stiff, and crossed the room to kneel beside the dog, careful not to startle him. Kerr opened one eye, amber brown now clearer than before, and watched Rowan without fear, without affection, simply present. Rowan nodded once. Presence mattered. He had already made the calls the day before. Animal rescue numbers routed through a county office that served too much land with too few people. The woman who answered sounded competent and tired, her voice carrying the clipped efficiency of someone used to explaining limitations. Roads were still compromised. Crews were prioritizing medical transport and power restoration. Earliest retrieval window, if weather held, was several days out. Rowan thanked her and wrote the name and extension on a scrap of paper he pinned by the phone, not because he doubted her intent, but because he trusted process only when he could track it. The waiting did not bother him. He had learned how to wait. What bothered him was the gap between intention and outcome, the way time could undo good plans. Over the next 2 days, Kerr's recovery advanced in small, meaningful increments. Rowan kept to a schedule he designed with the same care he once gave patrol routes. Hydration at measured intervals, warmth maintained, gentle movement introduced only when the dog signaled readiness. He did not push. He watched. Kerr's body told its story without words. The tremor of cold gave way to fatigue. Fatigue gave way to cautious strength. Kerr rose on unsteady legs once, then sat abruptly as if surprised by gravity. Rowan did not rush to help. He crouched nearby, hands open, allowing Kerr to choose the next move. Choice mattered too. Amos Calder came by once, left a bag of dry towels and a nod that passed for approval. He did not linger. Rowan appreciated that. The old man's presence was like a boundary marker, quiet, clear, and not to be crossed lightly. The valley remained still. No trucks, no new tracks. The road beyond the trees lay empty, its promise of movement muted by snow. On the third morning, the message arrived on Rowan's phone with the blunt economy of official language. Orders had shifted. A unit rotation moved up. He was expected to report earlier than planned. Rowan read the notification twice, then set the phone down on the table and stood there longer than necessary, eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. He felt the familiar pull, the clean certainty of returning to a world where choices were framed for him, where responsibility wore a uniform and came with clear lines. He also felt something else, quieter and more resistant. The weight at his feet, the warmth of a living body that had survived because he had not turned away. Kerr lay stretched near Rowan's boots, head resting on one paw, ears flicking at the soft sounds of the cabin. He looked different now. The dullness in his coat had begun to lift, black deepening, tan warming. The scar along his flank remained, a pale seam that caught the light when he shifted. His posture held caution without fear, the stance of a creature that had learned to measure before committing. Rowan recognized that posture. He had worn it himself for years. Rowan sat down on the floor, back against the wall, and let the decision take shape without forcing it. He thought of men left behind when the math changed, of promises that had been kept only in the telling. He thought of the box by the road and the cut collar. He thought of Amos's quiet certainty. He did not dramatize the choice. He stripped it to essentials. If he left now, Kerr would wait in a system already stretched thin, cared for by capable hands perhaps, but without continuity. If he stayed, he would carry the responsibility openly, without cover. Neither option was easy. Only one was honest. He picked up the phone and requested an extension. He kept his explanation brief and factual. A dependent animal in recovery. Remote location. Delayed handoff. He did not appeal to sentiment. He did not need to. The reply took longer than he liked, but it came. Extension granted. Conditions attached. Rowan accepted them all. The days that followed tested his resolve in ways he had not anticipated, not with danger, but with monotony and doubt. Kerr's strength returned unevenly, some hours good, others marked by sudden weariness that sent him back to the blankets with a soft huff of frustration. Rowan adjusted, recalibrated, stayed. He discovered the challenge of care without the clarity of threat, how easy it was to overdo, how tempting it was to measure progress against impatience rather than readiness. He learned to listen differently. A new presence entered the story on the 5th day, as the rescue window approached. Her name was Laya Mercer, a county animal welfare coordinator sent ahead to assess the situation before transport could be scheduled. She arrived in a mud-splattered SUV that looked older than its registration suggested, stepping out with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a knit cap pulled low over short, wind-tossed hair the color of ash-blonde straw. Lila was in her mid-30s, average height, built for endurance rather than speed, with a square jaw and skin weathered by fieldwork. Her eyes were brown and direct, the kind that met yours first and held. She shook Rowan's hand firmly, no flourish, no hesitation, and knelt to Kerr's level without asking permission, stopping short when the dog's ears tipped back. "May I?" she asked Rowan, not the dog, voice steady. Rowan nodded. Lila waited. Kerr watched. After a beat, he leaned forward and sniffed her knuckles. Lila smiled, a brief softening that did not compromise her focus. "He's resilient," she said, standing, "and cautious. Good combination." She took notes, listened as Rowan outlined the care he'd provided, the schedule, the setbacks. She asked practical questions and accepted practical answers. When she spoke of transfer timelines, her tone remained neutral, but Rowan heard the caveat beneath it. Resources were thin. Weather was unpredictable. Nothing was guaranteed. Later, as they stood on the porch, breath clouding the cold air, Lila glanced toward the road. "You could hand him off today," she said, not pushing, not pulling. "We'd manage." Rowan looked at Kerr through the window, saw the way the dog's body angled toward his boots even at rest. "He's not ready," Rowan replied. Lila studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Call me when you think he is," she said, "not when the calendar says so." She left her card and drove away, tires crunching, presence brief and competent, like a test passed quietly. That night, Rowan dreamed for the first time since returning. Not of missions or noise, but of a road without edges, snow falling straight down, a box opening to light. He woke with the image intact and did not try to shake it. He rose, checked Kerr, stoked the fire, and sat until dawn. Staying was not dramatic. It was repetitive. It was work. By the end of the week, Kerr stood unassisted, moved with care but confidence, and followed Rowan from room to room with a distance that shrank by inches each day. The dog's tail did not wag freely yet. It marked intention rather than joy. Rowan respected that. He did not demand affection. He offered consistency. He repaired a loose step on the porch and Kerr watched, head tilted, tracking each movement. Rowan found himself speaking aloud without thinking, narrating small tasks as if the words belonged there. The sound of his own voice did not feel intrusive anymore. When the call came confirming a delayed transport window, Rowan felt relief that surprised him. He could have handed Kerr over then. He chose not to. He called Laya and said he would keep Kerr until the roads cleared fully, until the dog could move without hesitation. Laya agreed without argument. "You're doing the work," she said. "That counts." On the 10th day, Rowan sat on the floor and tied his boots, preparing to clear snow from the back path. Kerr approached and lay down so close that his shoulder touched Rowan's knee. The contact was deliberate. Rowan paused, then rested his hand briefly on Kerr's neck, fingers splayed, pressure light. Kerr did not pull away. He exhaled. Rowan felt something align inside him, not like a victory, but like a decision affirmed. He stood, boots laced, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and alive. Kerr rose and followed, careful on the step, steady enough. Standing there, Rowan understood that choosing to stay had not closed doors. It had opened one, into a version of himself that could carry responsibility without armor. He did not know what came next. He did not need to. He had stayed when turning away would have been easier. That would have to be enough. Winter loosened its grip by degrees, rather than declarations. Snow still lay in the hollows and along the shaded edges of the road, but it no longer fell with the old insistence. Days lengthened. Light lingered. The valley learned how to breathe again. Rowan Hale noticed the change the way he noticed most things, without comment, with attention. He rose early, kept the stove fed, and moved through small repairs that had waited for warmer hands. Kerr followed him everywhere now, not under command but by choice, a steady shadow whose presence was quiet and unmistakable. The German shepherd had filled out in the weeks since the storm. His coat thickened into a dense black and tan mantle that shed meltwater in clean lines. The scar along his flank remained, a pale reminder that did not weaken him, but the ribs no longer showed. His eyes were alert and clear, amber catching light when he turned his head, ears lifting unevenly as if still deciding how much to listen to the world. He walked with confidence that was earned, not imposed, placing his paws with care on snow-soft ground. When Rowan stopped, Kerr stopped. When Rowan knelt to check a loose board or clear ice from the path, Kerr sat close, watching, waiting. Trust did not announce itself. It accumulated. Amos Calder became a regular part of the days, arriving without schedule, leaving without ceremony. He brought scrap lumber one morning, a sack of nails another, and once, unexpectedly, a pot of stew that smelled of onions and herbs. Amos was unchanged in his habits, lean frame, straight back, gray beard trimmed close, but something in his voice had softened. He spoke more often now, not about the man who had left the dog, not about fences or generators, but about weather patterns, old hunting routes, the way the river sounded when it broke free in spring. The stories came without pain. Rowan listened without interrupting. Kerr lay at Amos's boots and accepted the old man's touch, a slow scratch behind the ears that Amos offered as if testing his own permission. The house itself shifted. Rowan fixed the porch step properly, reinforced the latch that winter winds had worried loose, and cleared a narrow trail through the snowbank to the back shed. These were not grand improvements. They were acts of intention. When the fire burned, it burned for two. When Rowan cooked, he set down a second bowl without thinking. The cabin held warmth differently now, as if it understood use. The call came on a morning that felt like any other. Rowan had just finished clearing slush from the drive when his phone vibrated in his pocket. Orders were confirmed. Report date set. Travel window narrow. He read the message once, then again, and felt the old alignment click into place, the part of him that understood duty without resentment. He did not feel dread. He felt readiness. He also felt a quiet certainty about what would travel with him. Kerr sat on the threshold as Rowan returned inside, tail still, eyes following. Rowan crouched and rested his forearm on his knee. "We're moving," he said, not as a command, but as information. Kerr tilted his head, ears lifting, processing the tone rather than the words. He stood, stepped forward, and pressed his shoulder briefly against Rowan's leg. It was enough. Lila Mercer arrived 2 days later, this time with paperwork and a crate folded flat in the back of her SUV. She looked much the same as before, ash-blonde hair tucked beneath a knit cap, brown eyes direct, but there was a hint of relief in the way she took in Kerr's posture, the strength in his stance. She observed the interaction between dog and man, made notes, and then paused. "He could be placed," she said, choosing her words carefully. "There are families who'd want a dog like this." Rowan nodded. He did not argue. Lila watched Kerr circle once and settle at Rowan's feet. She closed her notebook. "There are families," she repeated, then met Rowan's eyes. "And there are bonds. I won't mistake one for the other." She signed where needed, slid the papers across the table, and left them there. Amos came by that evening. He listened while Rowan explained the timeline, the travel, the arrangements that would follow. The old man nodded, then surprised Rowan by smiling, a small, private curve of the mouth that did not seek approval. "You picked a good road," Amos said. He did not say which one. He did not need to. He stayed for stew and bread, told a story about a winter long ago when he'd taken in a stray horse with a bad leg and learned what patience demanded. When he left, he placed a hand briefly on Kerr's head and said nothing at all. Packing was efficient. Rowan had never owned much. He laid out gear with practiced order, checked lists, set aside what would stay. Kerr watched the process with interest rather than anxiety, stepping aside when asked, returning when called by presence alone. On the last night, Rowan slept in his bed for the first time in weeks. Kerr lay near the door, alert but relaxed. Snow fell lightly, almost apologetically, and did not stay. They left at dawn. The road was clear where it mattered. Rowan locked the cabin and stood for a moment, hand on the doorframe, feeling the grain beneath his palm. It was not a farewell. It was an acknowledgement. Kerr waited by the truck, tail marking the cold air once, then stilling. Rowan loaded the crate, secured it, and paused before closing the door. Kerr met his eyes, steady. Rowan nodded. He closed the door. The drive carried them through thinning snow and into wider light. Rowan checked mirrors, gauges, the rhythm of the road. Kerr settled quickly, breathing even, the crate no longer a boundary but a promise of order. When they stopped for fuel, Kerr stepped out and stood close, scanning the unfamiliar with calm interest. Rowan watched him, recognized the composure for what it was, not obedience, but confidence. By the time the unit facility came into view, winter had receded to the edges of the world. Rowan parked, cut the engine, and sat for a moment, letting the change register. He stepped out, unlatched the crate, and Kerr emerged, stretched, and stood at his side. There were glances from others, questions held back, assumptions forming and dissolving. Rowan answered what needed answering and left the rest alone. That evening, after arrangements were finalized and routines resumed, Rowan took Kerr for a walk along the perimeter, where the land fell quiet again. Snow lingered in pockets, catching the last light. Kerr moved with him, not ahead, not behind, matching pace. Rowan stopped where the fence line broke and looked out across open ground. He thought of the box by the road, of a night that could have ended differently. He thought of the choice to stay. He did not frame it as rescue, he framed it as recognition. Kerr leaned into his leg, solid and warm. Rowan rested a hand on the dog's neck, fingers splayed, feeling the strength there. The world did not need perfection. It needed attention. It needed someone willing to stop, to choose presence over convenience, to accept the work that followed. Rowan had done that once. He could do it again, in smaller ways, in quieter places. When they turned back, the lights came on behind them and the path ahead was clear. Rowan walked on and Kerr walked with him, a family chosen without ceremony, bound not by command, but by trust. Winter had taught them what mattered. They carried it forward, not as a burden, but as a way of living. Sometimes God does not answer us with thunder or signs written across the sky. Sometimes he answers with something small, cold, and almost forgotten. A life placed quietly in our path, asking only one question: will you stop? Rowan did not save the world. He did not undo cruelty, erase winter, or change the past. He simply chose not to turn away. And in that choice, something holy happened. Because miracles are not always about sudden healing or impossible escapes. Often, they are about presence, about staying when it would be easier to leave, about loving when there is no guarantee of comfort or reward. In our everyday lives, God places moments like this before us more often than we realize. A person who needs patience, a soul that needs protection, a quiet opportunity to do good when no one is watching. When we choose compassion, even in the smallest ways, we do not just change another life. We allow God to soften our own hearts. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, compassion, and second chances. May God bless you in your home. May he watch over those you love. And may he place gentle miracles in your path and give you the courage to stop when they appear.